Storytelling is so key to who we are as people. At its core, it's about connecting humans and, just being together, and that's the power of a story.
If you are open to what you're going to encounter, you are not going to be the same person that you were at the start of this reading if you haven't read these books before. Because if you listen to what people are saying, you are going to have a different perspective on some of these issues.
My dream is just to live in a better world that's better for the animals that live on it and the people that live on it.
I'm interested in people. I think that some writers who are more interested in ideas than in people, but I think that fiction functions best when it can make us connect on a human level.
When people come together, ideas come together, ideas and influences mingle, and what you have is cross-pollination. It's shared dreams, it's shared ideas. What's not to love?
Hello. Ricky Ross, though. Unbelievable. There's going to be a lot of this, Ricky Ross, I can tell. A very warm welcome to Edinburgh International Book Festival, and thank you to Johnson Carmichael for sponsoring this event. My name is Nicola Meighan. I'm a music journalist and broadcaster, and I am over the moon to be joined by this guy for the next hour. I'm going to tell you all about him shortly, but first, raise the roof and raise it some more for Ricky Ross. Since the 1980s, Ricky has soundtracked our lives thanks to the ballads and anthems of Deacon Blue. And if their songs have always celebrated home and faith and work and rain, then it's little wonder, because those forces drive at the heart of a reluctant and conflicted rock star, but we wouldn't have him any other way. Ricky explores those same ideas of family, religion and work in his enlightening memoir, Walking Back Home. This is it. It's wonderful. And we're going to be celebrating that at this very evening. It reflects on his Dundee childhood, his teaching, his youth work, and his lifelong love of storytelling and pop music, both of which are at the heart of Deacon Blue. The last 35 years, maybe more, of Scottish culture would have been a lot less thrilling and heartening without him. So please, one more cheer before we start for Ricky Ross. I told you, Ricky. I'm just very quickly going to tell you how the event is going to run before I forget. So Ricky and I will chat for about 45 minutes or so. We've got an hour in total, after which we would love to hear from you. If you're in the audience, we'd love to hear from you. If you're watching at home and online, thank you for joining us as well. We would love to hear from you too. There's going to be a roving mic. I believe you can get involved online if you are watching. After that, Ricky will be signing his wonderful memoir out there somewhere. There is a signing desk. You will be directed at the end of the event, so I don't forget to say later, if you could please remain seated just so we can get Ricky into situation for the signing, that would be awesome. That is all the housework. Done and dusted, Ricky Ross. How are you, and what's it been like over this past few weeks? Talking about yourself.
Well, it's been just really completely different to everything else you do. I was saying this to people today. I've never been at book events before. I've never done a book before. And it's sort of I don't want to belittle anything, because it's really wonderful and it's been so warm. But sometimes I feel I'm coming to this thing and thinking, right, what do we do here? You know, like you come to a gig and you think, I'll better get some songs together. And I've no idea what's happening in the next hour, really. But yeah, it's been really lovely just getting a chance to kind of retell some of these stories as well, and sometimes contextualize them as well.
Take us back just briefly to the beginnings of this story. It started, as so many things do, with a song, didn't it, on love?
It did. We were doing writing for a record is an interesting thing. I've always taken the line that you overwrite for records. I think it just goes back to, I think, the days when all you wanted to do was make a record. So you had millions of songs, and I always feel safer with more songs. So, you know, people say, when's a record finished? I always think a record's finished really when it's, when the final mix is done. But I've heard even stories, Warren Livesey, who we worked with, told us a great story about Peter Gabriel going in and actually forgetting about a backing vocal at the mastering point, which is like the very, very final bit. So it's almost as if, you know, until the record is mixed, until it's recorded and mixed, everything's all, you know, everything can be on it. And I was writing quite late on for this record, City of Love, and I'd written a song called On Love. It didn't have a title at the time. It was just a ramble, really, of thoughts. And we put the song on the record. But afterwards, I was reflecting. These were some of the characters in this. For example, my grandfather. My grandmother was bailing him. But my grandfather, I thought, oh, he's such a great character. He made such a big influence on me. He, you know, when we were young, we spent so much time. I particularly spent a lot of time with him and her. And I thought, am I really going to dismiss this guy in a couple of lines in the first and second verse? Wouldn't it be more fun to just think about him and write more about him? And then that lovely freedom when you've been a songwriter all your life. You sit down in front of a blank page, you think, oh, you don't have to make things rhyme, you don't have to make things work to the music, you can just go off, and then you can scrub it out and start again, you know. And no one was watching, I didn't tell anyone I was doing it, so I was just writing for fun, really.
Yeah, which comes across along with the love and the joy of memory, I think, really resonates as well. We're in Edinburgh tonight. Now, Deacon Blue are synonymous, I would say, almost with Glasgow. However, take us back, because one of your most beloved memories is coming to Edinburgh as a kid with your mum and your sister at Easter. Why do you think it had such an impact on you? Because that's lasted, hasn't it?
Yeah. Easter holidays, my mum was a teacher, so she had the Easter holidays off, and we'd always do magical things with her. I don't think my dad did so much at Easter, but we had the Easter holidays, and one of the big traditions, I don't know how many years it lasted, but it felt like we did it every year. Sometimes she'd bring a friend with us, but most times it would be just us. It'd be a wee picnic, because you wouldn't, in these days, eating out was just out of the, but you know, we were fairly middle class, bang on middle class, but even us, you know, we just didn't eat out much. So it'd be flasks, it'd be sandwiches, you'd have them either at the zoo, if the weather was good, or Princess Street Gardens, or somewhere sheltering from the rain, and you'd do the castle in the morning, and you'd do all the stuff on the Royal Mile, and then the zoo in the afternoon, and then you go back by the train, and of course you'd cross two bridges as well. And it was just a magical day. And I think coming to Edinburgh, I've always been a tourist in Edinburgh. I've never lived here, and I'm a tourist today. And I kind of walked up here just past some of my old haunts, and I love being that tourist still.
Yeah, treading these streets. It was actually a fringe gig through here in 1982 that you cite in the book as being, and I quote, the key event leading to any future success. Your sister wasn't very impressed with that, though, was she, Ricky?
She denies this, I have to say. She denies this story. I did a thing, I did a little solo. I mean, I was working in Dundee, I was working in youth work. A friend of mine was putting on these gigs somewhere not far away from here, in a little basement, and they said, come and do the support spot, and I came and did, and I wrote I was writing some songs at that time, and I think they were pretty gloomy. I think I was trying to be sort of quite serious, you know. And anyway, my sister and our then husband came, still her husband, but they were married at that time.
Controversial here already.
Married happily for 40 years. They came along to the gig, and I said to her afterwards, did you enjoy it? She said, that's the unhappiest night of my life. I should have really made a live album and just used that as a strapline, you know. But she vehemently denies this and said, I couldn't say that, because she's my best friend. She's a fantastic woman. Yeah, it was. But I think, funnily enough, I think it did, that night had an odd spiraling effect, because that was one side of it, which was that you can't leave people you can't unburden you know, and unburden. And well, some people can, and some people go for. There are certain people who go for that kind of thing. But I think you've got to give people hope. I think you've got to bring in some positivity and a way out. And when you get people together in a room like this at a gig, there's points where you're coming to feel release. They've got to feel that joy. So that was one thing I learned. And the other was that a friend of mine was there, a lovely guy called Charlie, who's remained a great lifelong friend. We had a big falling out at one point about a label, but he's a really great guy. And Charlie and his wife Dot had a record label at the time, a very small label. And later on, he'd heard one of these nights that I'd done, and said, "Do you want to make a little cassette album?" So we were on a journey down to London, I seem to remember, and he kind of put this thing up to me. We were all going down to talk to record labels about a band I was in, and it happened. And that cassette album sort of changed my life, really, because it was there. I was able to kind of go around saying, "This is who I am," rather than saying, "This is what I'd like to be."
Yeah, the idea of making an album as a body of work was always at the heart of your ambition for the band, for yourself at this point, and then a little bit later in Deacon Blue. You never really thought in terms of singles or hits. It was the idea of having an entity, an artwork that you could completely create as a whole.
Yeah, I mentioned this in the book. The really great friend of mine who's been a lifelong friend, David Heavener, and David's, I've often said this, David's the best songwriter I know, and I learned loads of stuff from him. I should give him credit, because years and years later, we were talking about a song, and I was saying to him, what's the opening line of that song of yours? And he said to me, and he sort of looked at me like, I don't know if I want to tell you this. He said, "Born in a Storm."
Really?
And I said, "Sorry about that one." It must have just kind of gone in there.
The opening title to Raintown.
Yeah. So David is a great songwriter, and we were in a band together. And we were kind of coming and going. We didn't really know what we were doing. And I mentioned this in the book. And one night he said to me, I always remember where we were. I remember him turning around, and I was probably being a pain in the arse at the time and sort of annoying him. And I said, "What do we want? What is it we want to do? What is it you want to do?" And he said, "Well, I really, really want to make an album." And I'm delighted to say he has, and they're really great. But also, it was an idea that I just went, wow, I know that sounds like a really, really obvious thing to say, but when you grow up in a place like Dundee and you're a million miles from the music business, and your only connection, real connection with the music business is your local record shop, maybe, you know, that's the only thing that comes in. You've no idea how to make that happen. You just don't know. So it was that kind of thing. People like Michael Mara, Billy Mackenzie, although I didn't know Billy, but I knew his wee brother, and I heard of the stories about the Associates. You know, these sort of things that happened to sort of stoke that ambition of this beautiful thing, the record. Because the LP, it's just a lovely, lovely thing. I mean, it doesn't matter what you listen to it on, but you know, if you do listen to it, even a CD, the fact it plays all the way through it, but it stops. You know, it stops at the right points. So it was a lovely thing to have.
Yeah, discussing the geographical distance between Dundee and, say, Glasgow or London is one thing, but there were other reasons that it felt very far from you. Give us a sense of how unlikely the notion of you making an album or being a rock star would have been when you were young, because pop music and all that it promised or threatened maybe was frowned upon, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, it kind of was. You know, I don't know how pop music got into my life. This is the funny thing, but that's the beautiful thing about pop music is so-called because it's popular, and it finds its way there. You know what I mean? And I loved the Beatles. I really did, and I loved the Stones as well. And I loved pop music, but we didn't have a record player. And it was maybe about primary 4 or 5 or so. I can't remember what sort of stage of primary school the record player came in. And I can't remember who bought it. Obviously, it was my mum or dad, and there must have been some decision-making process why they didn't have one, and now they had one. And when it came in, it was just the best thing ever, you know. And it was just a little portable record player. It wasn't a stereo or anything like that. And then anyone who had a record, parents, friends, lent them records. My sister's pal gave her a pile of 45s, of the Beatles 45s, and he said, this is her pal's big brother, I'm finished with these. So it was like...
How could you ever be finished with records?
He's probably been regretting this for the rest of his life, you know. And you would just put them on that spindle, and then you turn them over.
Yeah.
And so all these A-sides and B-sides meant as much to me as anything, you know. So it was an amazing event. And so we weren't really, no one was banning them, but no one was hugely encouraging them. And then the most magical thing ever happened. My cousin Patsy, who's a loose cannon, she's great, came to stay for 6 months, and she had a bit of family folklore about her because she was working in Marks and Spencer's at the time. She was going to be a nurse. She was working in Marks and Spencer's, and my dad was quite taken with this because he'd bought a few shares in Marks and Spencer's, and he thought this was going to help his case. And she was kind of, I don't know if she was sacked, but she was just so, she was working in the shoe store, and she just got so fed up with the customers, she just threw the shoes back at her. So she had a bit of rock and roll in her. But she brought with her some albums by Jimi Hendrix, but I can't remember the other ones, but Abbey Road. And she lived with us for 6 months, and for 6 months, Abbey Road was in our house. And I was in primary 7 or something like that. And that was like, it was the happiest time, and then she left, and Abbey Road left.
In the back door and back out the back door. That was the end of it. You've come over the years to soundtrack so many spaces that are beloved as well, dance halls, venues, football grounds. But again, they were banned when you were a kid, and therefore there must have been a real clandestine thrill about the idea of them. What was that like? Can you explain a bit about your religious upbringing and what impact that had on the way you saw these places?
Well, you know, I could probably read a thing here, which might illustrate it almost better. But basically, we grew up, and most of the things that you would now consider as being light entertainment were not on the cards. So it's probably easier just to read this, Nicola, if that's okay. Is that okay with you guys?
Absolutely.
Can you all hear me okay? Too loud, they say. It's too very loud.
Never too loud.
So this is a chapter called I Never Told My Parents I Went to the Regal. That's not a reference to cigarettes either, it's just a cinema. I must have been about 10. We decided to meet some girls. I didn't really know the logistics of meeting girls outside of the classroom or the Sunday school, but my pals hatched a plan to meet some girls on a Saturday afternoon. We were all to go to the pictures. As innocent as this sounds, it's difficult to explain just how thorny a problem it was. Cinemas, like pubs, bingo halls, football grounds, social clubs, dance halls, sports clubs, Roman Catholic churches, and even some Protestant churches, were pretty well out of bounds. Every other week, I'd hear the testimony of a brother who had spent his youthful days in drinking, dancing, and going to the pictures, only to have been saved from all of that. Very often, the brother would paint such a graphic picture of what my father referred to as his unregenerate days that one could feel a general outbreath of disappointment around the hall when the big conversion kicked in. My uncle, a missionary in Africa, once brought home from Zambia a man called Brian who'd been converted in the prison there. Brian spent a good 40 minutes telling us of his nefarious deeds before tacking on a swift, and then I got converted. In the final few minutes. A few of the ladies were a little flushed at all of that, but it was a wild night at the gospel meeting for us youngsters. It would be many years before I'd ever venture into licensed premises, but the cinema was a temptation that beckoned you in. Driving through the Seagate on a Saturday to arrive at a Christian rally at the other Brethren Assembly my grandparents attended involved going past the old ABC, where we'd see crowds of young people in a snaking line, queuing to get into the pictures. Above the line, the marquee would proclaim the title of the latest release. There would be a faint tut of disapproval from my parents as we passed the lost, all misspending their Saturday nights. We, on the other hand, were heading to a warm gospel hall, where tea would be served from steaming urns, accompanied by home baking, and Mr. Cathcart would conduct some glorious singing. There was no competition. And I go on to say that we sort of hatched this plan of going to the pictures. And basically, eventually, we got to go and see Mary Poppins undercover. You laugh. As the years went by, my parents' views on the cinema eased a little. There would be an occasional family visit to see a good film. Before all that happened, however, I was secretly making my way to a Saturday matinee at the Regal to meet girls. In my mind, this was the most covert operation I'd ever carried out. Excuses were made, times were set, and a bus ride or a long walk would have been taken to reach the Regal. Going to Dundee's most easterly picture house came with few frills. The local woman, generously referred to as an usherette, was a beastly ogre who carried a torch like a baton and delighted in shining it on any miscreants and shouting, "Get your feet off the seats," at the most sensitive points in any drama. I don't remember the movie I saw there that afternoon as we stumbled into the stalls. My only recollection is that it was again big and colourful, and everyone in it was suntanned. It may have involved Michael Caine, but I simply can't remember. I know I loved the adverts, though. Generically produced, they used exotic Mayfair locations for Chinese restaurants, then slammed on the local restaurant on Grey Street at the end. Believe me, the Chinese restaurant on Grey Street bore no relation to the one on the screen. We loved the actorly voice saying, "Roti Ferry," in plum received pronunciation, though. We'd never heard anyone say "roti" like that before. I could never tell anyone in the family about my visit to the pictures. It had been a normal Saturday afternoon as far as they knew, but I had been to the Regal, and now I knew there was another world out there I needed to find.
The rebellious streak of the young Ricky Ross there is putting me in mind of the woman, as so often it starts with a woman, your story, the book, your rebellious granny. Tell us about her. What a woman she sounds like.
She was great. So I had two sets of grandparents, and my maternal grandparents, Joe and Kitty, who are the ones that I spent more time with probably, and I love dearly, were just fantastic. My grandfather was my friend, and my grandmother was a great storyteller. She, sadly, would have been a bigger character, but she probably fairly early in my childhood started to get signs of dementia. So my memories of her are just really more as a, earlier on, but she was fantastic. She really was a storyteller. And then there was a slightly more difficult granny, my dad's mum, who was, she was just everything. She was almost exactly the opposite of them. She was, in my parents' terms, quite worldly. She smoked De Maurier cigarettes. She had records that we borrowed, and she spent. She was widowed very early on. She was widowed. I don't even remember my grandfather, and I felt, looking back on it, really, she spent almost 30 years as a widow, and I think at times you just thought, what am I doing? But she would love to go into spend money on furniture, spend money on clothes. And I think, essentially, my dad's business had to kind of pick up the tab from that. So she's slightly, so she would seem quite generous. And then she would buy something, and then she'd come to my mum and go, "Oh, Catherine, it doesn't suit you, have it, And my dad would sit there thinking, "I'm going to pay for that one way or another, But she was a great cat, and she had a little sister called Effie. And they would meet me, sometimes I'd see them in the town, and they would be making their way to the Jaeger shop on Reform Street. And the people in the Jaeger shop would almost be standing outside going, "Come on in," they could see her coming. But she had a real superstition. And I would drive her home on a Sunday night after she'd been over, when I could drive, even at her house. And she wouldn't want to drive past the graveyard where her husband was buried. She had that kind of Highland, it was always described as a slightly Highland sensibility. And many, many years later, I discovered that she wasn't a Highlander at all. she was just superstitious. Yeah, she was born in Queensferry.
Yeah. There you go. Did you keep a diary?
I think I'd kept a little bit of a diary, but I didn't, not any use to me really, no.
I'll tell you why I'm asking. Your recollections in the book, and even telling us here tonight of characters who were so formative to you, but so young in your life, are so vivid and so colourful, and it fascinates me that you managed to record that and memorise that, even subconsciously, because they sound in many ways, and they read in many ways, these beloved people in the book, like the characters that we meet in Deacon Blue songs over the year. They've all got something interesting, something humdrum, and they all just stay with us.
I think that all I do in the book, and I think all everyone does, is they remember the things that made the biggest impact. And so you don't remember a whole lot of stuff. You have no memory of I mean, you look at, if I ever look at my school photograph, and you can't remember certain people, and you remember other people, you know? And there's always that thing, isn't it? I remember people for certain things. And I think I remember the good things, and I remember some of the bad things, but I remember the things where it's sort of, someone stepped out of character a wee bit, or something happened that was unusual. But I think everyone remembers these things. And I realized that it's not about, one of the things I sort of had to kind of think about it as I did the book was, do I write a story about being in a band, meeting people, doing all that sort of stuff, and then we made this album, then we did that. And I just thought, I don't even want to read that book, you know what I mean? But what I want to do, what I find myself really drawn towards, is characters that I met. And also, I have to say this, because I mentioned David, and I think my friend, Jock, are you here today? Is Jock here? There he is. Jock is another person that one of the reasons I wanted to write about, one of the many people I wanted to write about, because he was one of my boss, my first boss who gave me my first start in life. And these people made a huge impact on me. They were phenomenal influence on my thinking and the way I acted and didn't act. And I kind of wanted to recognize that in some way, you know, because it's fantastic. Some people, you've met some great people, Nicola, you know, and you want to thank them in some way.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Also, as time passes, perhaps you reflect differently on relationships and the impact that people have had on your lives. You say that it's perhaps maybe only more recently you've realised that you inherited, if you want to call it, your theatricality, which I believe you do in the book, from your father, and you hadn't necessarily realised that at the time so much.
Yeah. My dad was he was as all people are really, he's quite a complicated guy. He was, at one level, very gregarious. He would sing in the car, and he would say to my pals, "Do you not wish you had a voice like mine?" You know, like, but he never finished the song. He would stand beside them in church. He would sing the first verse and then look around at the second one, and you know, he had that sort of dilettante approach to life, to that sort of thing. And then, when we were in teenage years, he would sometimes come in and stand in front of them and start singing a song. And my friends would say to me, "Where's he getting all the drink from?" You know, or find out what he had. And of course, he didn't drink. You know, that was the thing about it. He was naturally gregarious, and he would sort of embarrass my mum, and you know, go to slightly posh friend's house, and as he's leaving, sort of goes down, "Oh, what no, what a bite," and they were all go, "Shh, you know, this is a posh area, you know, this is the West End." And the more they said that, the more he liked doing it. "Oh, what no," you know. So he would do that, and yet at the same time, and I sort of allude to this, I think all through his life, he'd had trouble with some form of depression, anxiety, you know, mental illness, whatever you want to call it. And it really got worse as he got older. And I didn't realize it growing up, because it was only my grandmother who let slip one day when your dad was ill when he was young. And I said, what was that, you know? So he had that thing that lots of people have, you know, which is just, seems like almost a, you know, up and down, bipolar, seemingly. But I don't think it was bipolar. It wasn't as simple as that. But yes, he was, in a way, quite theatrical. And he had a great thing that I loved, which was, he'd say to me, which I totally related to, which was, I think he dreamt his way through school. And he'd say, "You know, I used to dream that the blackboard would turn round and there'd be a dance band and a guy conducting the dance band. I thought, that is so good, you know, because that's exactly what, you know, I used to think, you know, imagine someone walked in your, you know. I suppose I used to think, imagine Neil Young walked into my classroom, you know.
Yeah. You were like that as a wee boy a bit yourself. There's a point at which you say you're made to sit at the piano, but you're just looking out the window.
Well, looking out the window, I think has probably been my, the thing that's helped me the most. So if there's anyone out here ever got into trouble for looking out the window, don't take it. I was looking out the window one day. I used to live in this flat in Kenmure Street in Pollokshields. It's a great street. So, I don't know if you know it, but Kenmure Street is the street where the resistance happened last year to trying to throw people out of the country. And it was just, my pal even wrote a song about it, about the guy who held on under the van. It's a great place, great community. And we had a bay window in the flat where we lived. And I was looking out one day and I thought, all these guys walking up the street with these big brushes, you know. And I said, well, what do you do? And I think that's where dignity started. I think that's where the idea, because there's a guy walks up the street, and that must have been where it started. And it must have planted itself in my head, and I went off on holiday and I wrote down the song. But it was years later that I suddenly thought, yeah, that's right. There was a cleansing department at the bottom of the road. It used to be there. And that's kind of why I think I was looking out the window and seeing that. You can take that if you want.
Well, listen, speaking of which,
you're getting phone-in questions
that
now.
was actually another question I was about to ask, and it's about a telephone ringing, because in Raintown, there's a lovely moment you mentioned where you realise that perhaps for years prior, you'd been writing songs, but maybe hiding behind what you thought a songwriter should do, or hiding behind characters. And if there's a truth that completely resonates throughout Walking Back Home, an early encapsulation of it is in When Will You Make My Telephone Ring? You say yourself that's the first time you felt there was a truth in a song you were writing.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I found an old lyric book. I'm sort of rehearsing for my solo show, which sounds an odd thing, but I don't do them very often. So that's the first time I've played on my own for 5 years. I'm having to scramble back and try and remember what I should do and shouldn't do. And I was looking for an old lyric, and I found a book last night, and it had the original lyric of that song.
Really?
Yeah, well, it was typed out, but the interesting thing about it was it wasn't called When Will You Make My Telephone Ring? It was called I Can't Give You Anything.
Really?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So that lyric must have appeared a little bit later on. But the song, you're talking about how we came to record it, are you?
Just this fact that it was a truth emotionally for you, perhaps, rather than writing about someone else as much.
Yeah, I guess that's true. And I think that so much of when you're waiting around for things to happen, you're just doing that. You're just waiting around for, we would do a gig, and there was Glasgow in the 80s was a place of, I think lots of British cities were the same, but there was that sort of time when there were all the A&R people would come, and it was a Thursday night, and there'd be a gig here, there'd be a gig there, and then Friday morning they would be going to the studio and see what was happening. And it was just this sort of, festering kind of excitement. The band would get excited, and then you get a phone call, you put me on the guest list, all that kind of thing. And then you do the gig, nothing would happen, And it felt as if that had gone on for years. And it hadn't really, because once we did get the band right, it was great. But there was that thing of waiting, waiting for this moment. And I always remember, I remember the phone call coming in when it finally did come in. Really? Yeah, it was the day after we played at the Fix on Miller Street, and I got this phone call from, I don't know how he got my number, but he got my number, and he was the A&R guy, Gordon Charlton, who's still a good friend, and he said, he just said, I want to sign the band. How do I go about signing the band? Speak to me.
I'll tell you.
I'll sort you out. Yeah.
Really? So that was it? It was a phone call?
Well, it was essentially, it then sort of, as you can imagine, went into all sorts of, I didn't need to bring my boss up, he needs to see you, and all that kind of stuff. But yes, that was essentially about that, yeah.
Yeah, and this is after you had moved to Glasgow, but you paint a brilliant picture and a fascinating picture about the work that you did in Dundee before you left. It seems that it was so important to you not just to speak about the music or the songs, but also the experiences that led you to that point. Your work in Dundee was critical to that, wasn't it?
Well, I'm really glad Jock's here because Jock was the minister in the church that I was in, and I think he probably could tell that I didn't want to be a teacher. I'd been in staff rooms and I thought, I'm not sure I could do that, you know. And we were starting to do a lot of work with kids that were kind of not really churchy kids, and basically I was given some freedom to work as a sort of a youth worker essentially, and to do lots of different things and seeing which one happened. And the project that we eventually established was a youth project, which is interesting because about 5 years ago I went back, and there's still a project there, an outreach project. It's a different thing, but they were saying that actually the roots of it were way back in this other project. So that was really great. And I did a benefit gig for them in the old church, the Steeple Church in Dundee, and it was a really nice night. So I was working with kids who were, some of whom were referred by social work. They were trying to do a thing at the time, trying to keep kids out of going necessarily to care, keep families together. So we were running youth clubs and maybe just keeping an eye on kids. And it sort of formalized itself into a youth project. I didn't know what I was doing either, you know, but it sort of gave me, I would say, that period, 2.5 years, I say I learned more in that time. I learned more about life. I learned more about other people and more about myself than I think ever before. And I think all of that has shaped me. And the thing I'd lived in Dundee. I was this guy that lived in West Ferry in Dundee. I went to Dundee High School. You know, people used to say, people occasionally say to me, you know, Ricky, you know, you're working class. I'm not. You know, it's like that is just not me. I was a sheltered kid who lived in a nice little housing estate. But what happened then when I did work in the youth project, we stayed in the centre of town, I just realized there's a whole other world out there. And it's a brutal world, and sometimes violent, and sometimes, you know, really disappointing for people. And just sometimes people's lives are really just not good at all. And there's deep poverty, there's deep need, there's huge... At the time, a lot of the kids that we were working with were living in these high flats on the Hilltown in Dundee. Now, they were built in the 60s as being an answer to a housing problem, and they were knocked down again in, I think, in the 80s or 90s. So it's, you know, people made mistakes as well with the whole social policy of that time. So it was a really amazing time for me, and I met so many people during that period.
But you couldn't shake off the love or the lure of songwriting and music. It never went away, did it?
It didn't really. Well, I'm not really there's lots of musicians that you'll all know. Everyone will know. So and so plays guitar, or so and so plays piano. So, you know, play us a song. I could never do it. I never learned anyone else's songs. Partly because I didn't have the attention span. Partly because I'm not that good at doing it. Mainly because I'm not that good at doing it. So when I sat down to play the piano, I always wanted to write a song. It was just something that felt like I wanted just to go off on my own, and I just wanted to write songs. And that's all I ever wanted to do. And I didn't really know what was going to happen with them, but all during that time in Dundee, I just kept doing it. This church that we worked in was across you'll know it's right in the centre of Dundee. There's 3 churches together, actually, and they had a warren of church halls. And in each of these church halls or little vestiges, you could always get access to piano. So I'd be able to go over and just sit and play. And I guess I don't know what I did. I must have recorded or remembered them long enough to have them as songs. But that was kind of my apprenticeship of songwriting, I think.
So Glasgow becomes like a talisman to you, doesn't it, over time when you're brought down here? Tell us what that was like, because that city has been your muse and the heart of what you've done for decades now. It had such a profound effect on you.
It did. I took a teaching job, basically because I wanted to join a band with a friend of mine. Brian McGlynn was putting a band, and I was going to write songs with him. And I'm cutting a long story short here, but...
There's a whole memoir you can read.
Yeah, there's a book available. And I came down to play, and so essentially I took a job as a teacher. And the first job I'd been given was in St Mungo's in the East End of the city, which at the time St Mungo's was a new build school. It was a comprehensive school, but it was comprehensive Catholic school, but an all-boys school. And I don't know how you can put all these three things together, but that's what there was. And I got this job. The job didn't work out. You can read about that in the book. But the brilliant bit was, I was there. It was just before Christmas, and it was run by the Marist brothers, who you probably know if you've been in education in Scotland. There's a teaching order. And there was this particular brother who was the headmaster, and of course he welcomed me into his room, and I sat at the other side of his desk, and he said, "Mr. Ross, this is a beautiful school." And he sort of pointed, because it was just new built. He said, "It's got all the facilities, everything you'd ever want." And he literally, his head was like that, hit the desk like that. "If it wasn't for the boys." I thought, here we go. So I didn't like, as it happened, the job through a long convoluted process didn't happen. I ended up at another school, St Columba Viona Secondary, and that was a great move for me because, again, a really tough school, poor area of Glasgow, but really warm people and great staff who were great friends. But really, just it was Glasgow's a different place, you know. It's a different place to the rest of the planet. Never mind the rest of Scotland. But I love it. I think I always loved it. I came through. My sister lived there. I always loved coming. And of course, at the time, what was exciting was you had this model of bands and musicians who had made it, who'd made records, and who'd stayed in Glasgow. And the one that the band that everyone talked about was Simple Minds. You know, Simple Minds didn't go to London. They did, but they came back again. They lived in Glasgow, and they said to A&R people, "You come and see us." And it was, you know, it was all that kind of, that sensibility that, no, you know, it's kind of like, we know who we are, and if you want us, come and get us, kind of thing. And that really planted a big thought in my head.
Your mum features wonderfully throughout the book as well. I'm watching the time absolutely flying by, so you'll have to trust me. She plays such a huge part on a practical level, and she sits you in front of the piano. But looking at where the time is, I want to come back to where we started a little bit, which is, I believe, back in Edinburgh. And back then, or thereabouts, you had a song that Tom Morton once recorded called "Surprised by Joy." And looking back on your career, and particularly some of the hits and the best-loved songs, you have been surprised by joy. You had an experience with a priest which changed your relationship in many ways with those songs and with the audience.
It did, because, you know, you have to work out why you're there. And sometimes I would see gigs as some sort of puzzle, you know, that I had to kind of somehow make this difficult. I mean, Lorraine would say, "Why do you have to make it as difficult as possible? Why do you put all these songs in?" Because I want to see if that works. You know, I had this sort of almost Calvinistic kind of, you know, death wish, you know, about, I'm going to make this gig tricky, you know. And then if they prove that they like it, then we'll see, you know.
Then you'll maybe get dignity. Then you get more confidence.
Yeah, what an idiot. You know, just, you know. And eventually, Joe Boland, who was a great friend, got us to do a gig in Kilmarnock Prison. And I said to him afterwards, I said, what did you think about that, Joe, then? He said, well, there was joy there. And where there's joy, there's God. And I thought, God, that's true. Sometimes I've been denying the fact that just allow people to have joy and fun. That's what we've brought into hopefully into their lives. And you know, when Real Gone Kid comes on and everyone stands out of their seat and they come back from the bar, don't resent them for that. Love them for it, because they loved that song, and that song has come into their lives too. So I'm hugely grateful for an audience, and I'm sure lots of these people here tonight are here maybe because of these songs, and they're here because maybe they've been to these gigs. So thank you for that, because I genuinely do think that these moments are great. And I'm at an age where I know I'm not going to be able to do this, you know. I can barely walk on a stage at the moment. I've had this injury since the tour. I'm at an age when I know these things won't happen forever. And I'm grateful. I'm just very grateful that we just get these moments together. And, you know, like a few weeks ago, one or two of you might have been at Edinburgh Castle, and we had the sun shining on us, and it was as good as it gets.
Can't ask for more than that. If you've got any questions, I'm sure Ricky would love to hear them and to answer them. Can you put up your hands if you do, please? There is a roving mic. Just while we're finding somebody, Ricky, could you just quickly tell us about... Oh no, here we go. Don't even need it. Super organised. Go on over here.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ricky. We've been reflecting on the songs of Deacon Blue, which are soundtracks to many of our lives. But what about yourself, thinking about words and music? Who would be your go-to book author, or maybe your song composer, when you have a moment of downtime and can relax?
Oh, well, thank you. I get so bogged down in country music now because I do a radio show, and I have to draw myself away from it because I find myself listening to a lot of it, obviously, for things that I want to play on the show. So there are so many. But the other night we had pals around, some of my best pals, and I found myself playing a little mixtape that I'd made up of Bob Dylan on his 80th birthday, and I thought, well, I'd be very happy if that's all that existed. You know, it would still be great. And I have to say, when it comes to memoirs, I have read a few memoirs by people and also biographies, but if you want one that will just really, it's in a category all of its own. It's Chronicles by Bob Dylan, which is meant to be part one. I don't know when part two will ever come, but it's such a great read. And you kind of half think he's making half of it up because it's all done from, you know, photographic memory, and you think, Bob, you didn't really remember, but that's part of the fun, you know.
Stories are stories, right? That's all we need. Was there another question over here somewhere? Oh, sorry, yeah. Sorry for pointing at you, but yeah. You can get the mic. Pass the mic.
Is it on?
Yeah, you're good.
Couple of things, Ricky. Congratulations on being a granddad.
Thank you.
Review, you had it a couple of not long ago.
Yeah, it does deserve a round of applause.
And the two wonderful gigs you've had in Edinburgh in the last 10 months or so. But, short and sweet, what next?
Well, next is, you know, I'm the paranoid person who's going home tonight to go tomorrow morning to rehearse in my front room and get my stuff together for the church. So I'm going on tour in September. I'm going to be playing in Edinburgh at the Queen's Hall, which is one of my favourite places to play ever. And they've got a beautiful piano. So if I get through that, that will be, you know, that's about a month of work, and we have a grandchild coming over to see us in a couple of weeks' time, also. So in a family sense, that's a big occasion, and my second daughter is getting married as well. So I've got enough on my plate.
Right. And then some. Where else do we have any hands up? There's one here, and then I can see someone over there as well. So I'll keep an eye up here as well, I promise.
Ricky, thank you for your kind words earlier.
This is Jock.
Yeah.
Jock. Oh.
What I remember most about your time in Dundee was your ability as an actor. I still remember you playing in the Glass Menagerie, and it was just wonderful. And I confess, I always thought you were wasted going into pop music. But no doubt I was wrong about that. But would you like to reflect on the relationship between acting and singing, and whether, in fact, you got anything out of your time as an actor in Dundee?
Well, Jock, I wish my wife were here to hear that tonight, because she's... I tell her that I was a ham, and I was. But thank you very much. No, I still love the theatre. I was meeting with my great friend David Gregg at lunchtime, and I have a deep love of theatre, because it's a place where I go on my own. You know, like if no one else in the family wants to go, and even my wife being an actor, sometimes I've got to drag her to theatre. And so that's my deep love. And I find myself, if I'm in London, I can always get one ticket for something. It's funny, because if I have any talent, my son is now an actor, or he's about to be an actor. He's just graduated from Guildhall, and we think he's very good. So once we see him joke, you can tell me if he's, tell him that he obviously was influenced by me, and that will really, that'll make my year.
There was someone over here, I think, maybe. Hello there. Talking about kind of soundtrack to life, we are here as three women who came to see you first when we were 15 back in the 80s and have continued to do that for the rest of our life.
Could you put your hand up, because I can't see you?
Here.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah.
And there's been a lot of reflection in the last few years, as you know, you get to a certain age. And I just, thinking about us as teenagers, wonder what your children have made of this over the years, having had, I know you'll just be mum and dad and it's normal, but it's actually not normal to have a 35-year career in the music business and to have songs like Dignity and Real Gone Kid that get played at everybody's wedding, everybody's party, all of that, and how that is for them, really.
Thank you. That's a lovely thing to say. My kids, in 1994, when we broke up for the first time, my third daughter was being expected, and my son wasn't born until 2000. So in some ways, their teenage years were when we weren't that busy. So Georgia, my youngest daughter, some people would come up and say, what's your favorite song? She'd go, Blue Horsey, which is an obscure song from a solo album, you know? It was really quite good. The thing that actually was most difficult was when Lorraine was in River City, because they were at secondary school, and that was a little bit difficult at the time. And she purposely avoided storylines that would be hard well, she tried to avoid where they were going to go with her story, and that's why she left, actually. But I have to say, I didn't put my kids in the book because I just feel they've had enough. You know, they've done well, but they are brilliant. They're four of my closest friends. They're brilliant people. They're all talented in different ways, and they've all had the sense to keep music as a hobby. But yeah, thank you. But they're great about it. They're really generous, and I sometimes feel the same way as you do. So what on earth have we done to these poor people? But they've been great about it, and they are. The one thing that's funny is they always say, they get rolled up, well, my daughters came back quite late at night, quite a lot on taxis, as you can imagine, during their teenage years. And as the taxi was coming up at 3 in the morning, they'd say, oh, you're going to Deacon Blue's house.
Them's the breaks. Another question over, up here. Oh, hi. Yeah. Balcony.
Hi there, Ricky. I'm originally from Fort Hill, and also went to Fort Hill Primary School, so we have some crossover. But just had a wee question. What does it feel like for you when 30,000 Dundee United fans sang Dignity after winning the Cup in 2010?
I've got to tell you that I never noticed because I was so euphoric myself. And people would say to me, oh, you know, what's happening? But I was so, and then my son was there, and it was his first cup final, and I was thinking, and you know, he was just accepting this as all normal, and I was saying, it's not going to be like this, you know. But you don't want to be the party pooper, you know what I mean? But people have told me that it happens, and I'm really, it's fantastic, yeah, absolutely fantastic, yeah. That still is a great day. As you know, it hasn't happened very often.
Another question. There's one at the back here, and then there's someone down there at the front as well.
Yes. Hello. Yeah, I just want to say, especially the longevity of Deacon Blue, 35 years. You're obviously quite a tight unit. You know, you obviously respect each other and are great to make part of the whole. My son and I bumped into Doogie Vipond in Bridge of Allen a few years ago. My son was about 11 at the time.
He's a nasty piece of work. I wouldn't.
And my son was like, oh, it's the first famous person I've met. And he asked him for his autograph, and of course he gave it to him. I don't like the selfie thing. I didn't encourage that. You know, I'm old school. But, you know, you guys, you've got so much going for you individually, but obviously as a whole, you all really get on well. We were at the Edinburgh Castle gig with my son recently. I've seen you a couple of times in the 80s as well. So just well done to you all.
Thank you.
You're quite the role model in many ways, and that's what comes into your songs.
Thank you. These guys are really, thank you. I was going to say that the thing about, I didn't grow up with brothers, so the guys in Deacon Blue are my brothers, and it's a very strong relationship. You know, and there's times when they really would hate me, you know, and there's times when I resented them, because you always do that in bands. It's like a family, you know. It's like, well, I'm going around for Christmas, and people would say to us, "Oh, do you guys all go out the pub and you go out to dinner when you're off?" You don't realize the amount of days you've spent hanging around at airports and hotels and dressing rooms, boring each other with the same old stories. So we don't often hang out as much, but they are just the closest people. And I have to say the two newer people who they've been there for 12 years or so, Gregor and Lewis, are just also equally just wonderful people.
Yeah, that friendship is definitely the heart of the band. There was another question down here somewhere. Yeah.
Hi, Ricky. Is this on? Yeah. I was actually at the High at the same time as you, and my memory of the music department was that it was horrendous. We never learnt a damn thing. I was even told not to sing on one occasion, ever again, probably wisely. But was there anybody there who enthused you at the time, or what about like Mike Mara? You mentioned him and Gales Blue coming out at that time. Yeah. Did you know Mike?
I didn't know Michael at school. What happened soon after leaving, I left in the 5th year. I didn't really like school. I'll be honest with you. I've been back and I love, some teachers there I thought were great and I respected them. But I didn't love school, and I left as soon as I could in 5th year. And then we started going down to a place called Laings, just on Rosangle, and that's when I saw Skeets Bolivar. And they were like, that was Michael's band. That was the first time I saw him. And I remember meeting him in Larg's music shop and being quite starstruck. And then, I think I talk about this in the book, if I don't, I should have done, that I met him one night and he was kind of a bit drunk and smoking a pipe for some reason, and standing outside a pub trying to get a pipe lit. It was a great scene. And he just became a friend, and I realized that I'd kept letters and so on. Of course, Michael toured with us in '91, and there was he was a great, great character. Many, many funny stories. The best story of Michael is, he came in Europe with us, and I think he wanted to come and play gigs in Italy, and we got to Milan, and I've got a note which I've still got somewhere in the house, which said, "We'll see you at soundcheck. Have met Martina Navratilova." So when I got to the dressing room, I said, "Michael, what was the story about?" He says, "Well, I met her." He said, and I said, "Can I have your autograph?" And she wouldn't give me an autograph. And I just said, "Oh, Martina." And for some reason that didn't work.
Can't think why. Okay, we've got time for one last question, I guess. We've got a countdown clock. I don't know if you can see it. It's running low. One more question.
Hi, Ricky.
Good, are you?
I'm here.
Great.
It's George. When you sit down to write a song, have you already made up your mind it's a Ricky Ross or a Deacon Blue, or do you wait until it's finished and then decide?
I know I get asked this question a lot, and over the years I've never come up with a good answer for it. But I think when I was with Short Stories, this new record, I really had these half ideas that were already going to be songs, and I felt that were instinctively that they were going to be very intimate songs that just would work with a piano and a voice, and it didn't need other people, and I just expressly didn't want other people on it. So I think when it comes to a song like that, and it just needs the simplicity of it, the songs that could maybe go both ways. And there is a song, Lorraine loved the song Spanish Shoes on this new record. So we've got to do that one. I said, no, that's mine. That's mine. So there are songs that I'm sure we could have done. I always felt that a solo song that I had called This Is the Life was the song that Deacon Blue should have had. We should have had that one and made something of it, because I think that's probably one of the best songs I've written, in my opinion, always these things. But yeah, I don't really know, but they seem to find a home,
Always come back to home. Ricky Ross, the time is up. Can you believe this already? The hour has flown by. Thank you so much for coming along. Thank you for watching at home or wherever you are online. Thank you so much to Edinburgh International Book Festival. Ricky Ross, everybody. Isn't he wonderful? This is his book, Walking Back Home. If you can just please remain seated until we whisk Ricky out of here.